Late one muggy afternoon in Birmingham, Cage West straightened his immaculate tie on the courthouse steps. A federal prosecutor known for tearing through corruption cases, Cage didn't see the danger coming until Sergeant Victor Crane slammed him against a squad car, cuffs biting into his wrists. Crane muttered about a reported armed robber in a fancy suit, disregarding the federal ID in Cage's pocket and ignoring his measured protests. Hauled into the precinct, Cage found himself behind bars in a cramped holding cell that smelled of sweat and stale coffee. In the echoing corridors, rumors buzzed. Who was this tall black man in a tailored jacket? And why was Crane acting so sure of his guilt? Despite Cage's calm explanations and the gold DOJ badge he displayed, Crane sneered, labeling it a cheap fake. Cage's mind reeled. He'd sparred with crooked cops and cartel enforcers in court, but rarely expected to be the target of their venom outside the legal arena. Hours later, his longtime friend and defense lawyer, Travis Horn, arrived, brandishing legal threats like a seasoned gunslinger. "No probable cause, Victor," Travis said, stepping into Crane's personal space. "Release him, or I'll see you in front of a federal judge." The sergeant's fury simmered, yet after a tense standoff, Cage was freed. That night, riding in Travis's battered sedan, Cage felt both relieved and oddly apprehensive. He had seen something in Crane's cold stare that promised retribution. The sense of foreboding solidified when Cage returned to his apartment. His phone pinged relentlessly with ominous messages, anonymous threats spewing hatred and violence, slurs laced with pictures of nooses and references to knowing where you live. The next morning, the tabloids took aim. A scorching headline, "Corrupt Prosecutor Turned Thief," splashed across local news. The piece smeared Cage as a supposed mastermind behind a string of robberies. Crane's fingerprints were all over it. Suddenly, Cage's own office placed him on leave under ethical concerns. Colleagues ghosted him, and outraged citizens flooded social media demanding that justice be served. Undeterred, Cage filed a defamation suit, certain that facts would prevail. But the blows kept coming. While driving home with his 16-year-old son, Trey, Cage was pulled over again, this time with Crane himself leading the charge. In a theatrically swift search, Crane's partner discovered a small bag of white powder under the driver's seat. Before Cage could protest, Trey's panicked cries filled the car as Crane slammed Cage into the door, hissing racist slurs. The false drug charges threatened a multi-year prison term, a possibility that churned Cage's stomach more than any bullet had. They tossed him into a cell for 2 days, denying calls while Trey was left in tears. Eventually, Travis secured dash cam footage that captured Crane's partner planting the drugs, forcing the judge to dismiss the charges. A short-lived victory ensued. Cage's name partially cleared, at least in that single matter. Yet the looming presence of Crane remained. Sure enough, a series of nightly phone calls, hush-hush rumors, and vile threats suggested that Crane's vendetta had only escalated. The more Cage tried to push for official inquiries into the sergeant's conduct, the more hateful the city's fringe elements turned on him. His car windows were smashed, bricks lobbed through Trey's bedroom, and neighbors spat at him. Tired but resolute, Cage clung to the notion that truth would outshine any darkness Crane tried to cast. The illusions of safety crumbled further, however, when a militarized raid targeted him at home, Trey screaming in terror. Federal prosecutors weren't immune. This was war, and Crane was just getting started. At daybreak, battered by the prior night's violent theatrics, Cage sat slumped in a county cell, haunted by Trey's traumatized screams. The uniformed guards' mocking sneers underscored how deeply Crane's poison permeated the precinct. "Big shot prosecutor in a jumpsuit?" One guard laughed. "Bet you thought you were untouchable." That guard withheld food, withheld calls. Basic rights turned into twisted privileges. Cage had seen abuses from the prosecutorial side, but never felt it so viscerally. The claustrophobic gloom, the stench of mildew, the incessant clang of metal doors. Travis fought tooth and nail. With evidence from the dash cam and a wave of local activists demanding Cage's release, a new judge finally granted him bail. Emerging from jail, ribs bruised, wrists raw, Cage discovered his apartment ransacked. Worse yet, social workers had snatched Trey away, citing ongoing criminal activity. The heartbreak of losing his son to a flawed system felt heavier than any handcuff. Cage, unraveling with fury and despair, found himself leaning on his sister Rena for shelter. On a borrowed laptop, he hammered out a written plea to Iris Blanchard, an investigative journalist who had once exposed shady police ops. Iris ran a scathing article titled, "Federal Prosecutor Framed by Rogue Cop." The city took notice, some outraged, others enthralled. A sudden wave of public support forced the county to backtrack. Trey was returned to Cage after a humiliating hearing in which the social workers admitted they had no real evidence. Crane grew more brazen. After Trey's homecoming, bricks shattered Cage's windows again, curses echoing in the street. Yet this second surge of intimidation backfired. The city's fury ignited. Protesters swelled outside the precinct, demanding Crane's badge. Investigative teams from the DOJ pried open old files, linking the sergeant to a labyrinth of brutality and cover-ups. Within a week, he was suspended. Cage momentarily tasted victory, cradling Trey in his arms. But Crane unleashed a new horror, a planted bomb under Cage's sedan. By sheer luck, Cage spotted suspicious wiring. His frantic call to the bomb squad diffused the device, an event that lit up local news in a terrifying loop of footage. Calls for Crane's arrest escalated. Meanwhile, Travis presented their strongest evidence, footage, phone records, the string of attacks, to a federal judge. The resulting order placed Crane behind bars pending trial for attempted murder. Cage, Travis, and Trey let themselves breathe. They'd done it, or so it seemed, the monstrous cop caged at last. Comrades outside and inside law enforcement whispered that Crane was merely a symptom of bigger rot. Cage brushed those whispers aside. He had spent months battered by direct, physical evil. If Crane was locked away, how could any bigger network be more dangerous? He pressed forward, building the state's case for Crane's impending trial, certain that once the sergeant was convicted, peace would follow. Trey's nightmares subsided. Rena's anxious pacing lessened. And Cage's apartment, though still bearing broken windows and scorch marks, began to feel like home again. For a week, life approached normal. Then everything cracked like glass under a sledgehammer. Crane's wealthy older brother, Alfred Crane, a state senator with polished suits and a silver tongue, stepped in. Alfred lambasted Cage on every media channel, calling him a corrupt race baiter. The new wave of slander overshadowed Crane's trial. Within days, the IRS audited Cage. Trey's school expelled him for a disciplinary violation that had no real explanation. Cage recognized the senator's hand in each tactic, each strike aiming to bulldoze his life from behind the scenes. Indeed, it felt as if the entire city reeled under the senator's invisible grip. Unable to budge the senator through normal channels, Cage shifted gears. He scoured property records, campaign donations, and hush-hush tips from one of Alfred's ex-staffers. Piece by piece, a monstrous conspiracy emerged. Police payoffs, black communities coerced into silence, real estate grabs. Alfred had orchestrated these dark dealings, using Sergeant Crane as a vicious attack dog. Alarmed, Cage fired off evidence to Iris, who broke the story wide open. Within hours, Alfred Crane's dirty empire was the top headline. Protests re-erupted, bigger than ever, demanding the senator's resignation. And though Alfred resigned amid public outrage, the damage extended deeper than a single politician could fix. Alfred Crane's fall might have ended the Crane dynasty, but Cage's sense of security barely lasted a breath. One dawn, a jail riot erupted. A group of loyal officers helped Sergeant Victor Crane escape. Cage woke to televised images of a uniformed guard, still wearing Crane's blood on his collar, saying, "He's loose." The phone rang with a tremulous official. "We found a note. Coming for you, West." This chilling news slammed Cage's hopes that once the senator was dethroned, his world would heal. Instead, fear returned, doubled by Crane's unstoppable hatred. Feds swarmed the safe house at Rena's place, where Cage huddled with Trey. The nature of the threat had changed from bureaucratic strangulation back to raw violence. Trey saw the fear in his father's eyes and asked, "Will he find us again?" Cage could only vow, "I won't let him." Inside, though, he knew Crane's cunning. The man had allies in uniform, pockets of dark loyalty. The process servers and protest signs no longer deterred him. If Crane thrived behind bars, how deadly might he be outside them? Crane's first strike back was subtle, a phone call Cage nearly dismissed, but the voice on the line, distorted and cold, insinuated that bigger players than Alfred Crane had orchestrated the entire fiasco. "Victor's just a pawn," the voice rasped. Then silence. Cage steadied himself. Was someone else pulling strings from the shadows? He'd glimpsed swirling rumors of deeper rot in the DOJ. Vernon's older brother had seemed like the puppet master, but apparently there was more. The possibility that Crane's lethal fervor served an even more powerful group took shape in Cage's mind, like a gathering storm cloud. He pressed for details, searching through the same records he had used to topple Alfred. Nothing pointed clearly to a hidden figure. Meanwhile, the city roiled with protest. People demanded not just the senator's removal, but a top-down purge of the police force. In the swirl, Cagey was crowned a local hero. "Man who defied the Crane family," said newspapers. The cult of personality around him grated on his raw nerves. He wasn't unbreakable, and Crane's bullets would ignore any headlines. Late one muggy night, just as Cagey was starting to unclench, a faint rustle outside triggered primal alarm. He peered out a window to see hooded silhouettes skulking near Rena's fence. Gunshots ripped the night air. Cage, Trey, and Rena ducked low, fear pounding in their chests. The feds who had promised 24/7 coverage were nowhere. After a tense standoff, the assailants melted away, leaving bullet casings on the lawn. By dawn, official cars arrived, apologies on their lips. Cage's anger broke through. "Your negligence nearly got my son killed." Desperation made him recontact an unorthodox FBI agent, Zara Reyes, who had earlier guided him through the Crane fiasco. She offered a plan: track Crane through certain informants who might trade intel for immunity. Cage agreed, packing an overnight bag for a discreet sting operation. Under the hush of a rickety warehouse, hidden among corroded shipping crates, Zara and Cage lay in wait. Rumor said Crane was meeting paramilitary recruits for a last-ditch attempt at vengeance. If they could intercept him, maybe they'd prevent new bloodshed. Close to 2 a.m., Crane showed. Even half limping from old injuries, he radiated menace. A standoff exploded in muzzle flashes and fierce curses. Cage scrambled behind crates, returning fire. Zara took down Crane's new recruits with practiced precision. In a chaos of bouncing echoes, Cage advanced on Crane. The sergeant glowered, spitting, "You belong in the ground." At the last second, Cage's bullet shattered Crane's pistol, driving the man to his knees. Zara's cuffs clinked around Crane's wrists, locking him down once more. Cage exhaled, the tension trembling in his arms. He'd recaptured the monster, or so he thought. They slapped Crane with heavier charges, each bullet in that warehouse standoff sealing his fate. The press roared triumph. Crane's reign ends again. Prosecutor saves city from rogue cops' militia, and more. But overshadowing that victory was the same question. Who had shaped Crane's unholy crusade? The cryptic voice repeating pawn gnawed at Cage. He spent sleepless nights rifling through digital footprints, forging new alliances with federal agents who seemed equally perplexed. Trey resumed school, albeit under protective detail. Rena ventured out carefully, shotgun leaning by the front door. The final trial against Crane rushed forward, presided over by a stern judge who took no nonsense. Over days of testimony, KJ laid bare the entire timeline: the malicious arrests, the threats, the bombs, the kidnapping attempts. Witness after witness confirmed the sergeant's vendetta. The courtroom's hush turned electric when a recorded conversation emerged, Crane bragging about guys upstairs who funded his madness. Cage pressed the DOJ to identify those guys, but official statements claimed no knowledge. The jury, outraged by Crane's consistent brutality, returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Judge Harms hammered down an extended sentence with no parole. Even then, Crane erupted, yowling accusations that Cage was the one rotten at the core, protected by bigger sharks. He spat, "I'm small time. They'll bury you after they bury me." That theatrical meltdown plastered news feeds, capturing the attention of conspiracy theorists. Some dismissed Crane's claims as raving nonsense. Cage wasn't so sure. He recognized that sneer. Crane had served as a vicious puppet for powerful men, and his last words rang eerily genuine. But the media soared with the narrative of Cage as champion. A jubilant city held candlelight vigils celebrating the last stand of Sergeant Crane. In front of the federal courthouse, crowds chanted Cage's name. "We're free of corruption," the mayor declared, awarding KJ a civic medal for valor. Exhausted yet proud, KJ accepted with a modest grin, Trey and Rena at his side. At the reception dinner, Zara Reyes approached him quietly, saying, "Crane's meltdown was real. We have partial leads on his higher-ups, but it's murky." Cage froze mid-sip. He whispered back, "Don't let it fade." Days stretched. Freed from Crane's immediate threat, Cage tried returning to normalcy. The sun glinted on Birmingham's streets as folks offered kind words, freebies at stores. Trey's nightmares receded, replaced by typical teenage fuss. Rena resumed steady work. The feds turned their attention away, chasing other cases. Even Zara's check-ins dwindled, yet Cage's gut churned. Some nights, watching the city lights, he recalled the bombs, the noose, the bullet holes. Crane behind bars wasn't the end if a bigger hand still lurked. Unease crystallized one late evening when Kage discovered an unmarked envelope under his front door. Inside were photos of him and Trey at a diner that same afternoon, each time stamped. No letter, no threat, just silent proof he was under surveillance. He dialed Zara, only to reach a disconnected line. He called Iris Blanchard, the journalist who had revealed so much, but she had no leads on hidden puppet masters. He tried old DOJ contacts, but they insisted, "Crane's done. Relax." That evening he prowled the living room, the weight of the envelope suffocating. He realized that bigger storms might be in motion. Some malevolent entity had nurtured Crane's vendetta, letting the sergeant lash out until he couldn't be controlled. Or perhaps they sacrificed him precisely when the heat grew too intense, ensuring no trail led to their door. The phone beeped, a text from an unknown number. This was never about one cop. You're in over your head. Kage's heart thudded. Maybe the city and the headlines wanted a tidy ending, but real justice demanded a deeper reckoning. The flames that had nearly consumed Kage's life were only sparks from an inferno smoldering beneath the system he once trusted. Rena insisted Kage take Trey to a safe cabin hours south, but the ephemeral victory aura overshadowed such caution. With Crane imprisoned for life, many believed the saga done. "Let the city heal," said an earnest local councilor. Kage tried forging ahead, returning to the caseload he'd neglected. But every time he stepped into the DOJ building, a hush fell. Uneasy glances exchanged. Whispers about a new wave of hush money shipments to certain officials fluttered around. Cage pressed to open formal investigations, but superiors balked. Friction escalated when Cage encountered repeated bureaucratic blockades. His supervisor kept redirecting him. "Focus on routine cases, not conspiracies in your head." Travis recommended caution, citing the old adage that cornered beasts lash out hardest. Yet Cage refused to shrink back. He suspected a rottenness that extended beyond the Crane name, and each attempt to dig deeper slammed him into NDA-laden walls. More intangible threats trickled in, strange men in tinted cars idling outside the safe house, suspicious clerical errors that locked him out of DOJ data, small acts that added up to a crescendo of intimidation. Hoping to gather fresh evidence, KJ reconnected with Mila Wynn, once an aide to Alfred Crane, the senator. She had fled state politics after glimpsing suspicious deals. Meeting covertly in a lonely rest stop off I-65, Mila handed him an old flash drive of internal memos linking an unnamed central patron to local paramilitary expansions. She heard the name Black Hydra whispered in phone calls. The sense of an organized sub-faction orchestrating systemic sabotage gave Cage chills. "I left before I knew details," Mila apologized. "But they're bigger than the Cranes, like a hidden board controlling half the region." Further digital digging uncovered fragments referencing Operation Nightfall, an apparent blueprint for stoking racial conflict in certain wards of Birmingham, all to manipulate property values. More disturbing was a mention of Cage's name, singled out as a prime threat needing neutralization. The raw arrogance in those lines outraged him. If Crane and Alfred had been instruments, who was strumming the strings? A private meeting with Travis and Zara confirmed the sense of an undercurrent. Zara's unofficial FBI sources glimpsed hush accounts in multiple states, all tied to shell corporations, laundering money for clandestine expansions. Yet nobody would sign an official affidavit. Fear choked each potential whistleblower, the memory of bombs and bricks too real. Meanwhile, Cage's presence began stirring fresh hostility in the DOJ corridors, as if some colleagues wanted him gone. "This entire city wants to rest," Travis whispered. "They see you poking at deeper shadows and they're afraid. They want calm, not truth." Cage kept pushing, but found no tangible center. Was Black Hydra even real, or a rumor Crane invented to spook him? The phone calls from unknown resumed, always the same distorted voice. "You keep searching, you'll spark a bigger war." Then it would hang up, leaving Cage fuming, flanked by Rena and Trey's anxious eyes. The last call was more explicit. "You're about to cross lines that guarantee casualties. Turn back or watch your son pay." That night, Cage stood by Trey's door as the teen slept, shoulders tense. He saw glimpses of the battered boy trembling behind a shattered couch, those watery eyes. He refused to let that horror be repeated. In a swirl of dread, Cage realized Crane's downfall was only a rung on the ladder. The real architects cared little about the sergeant's petty vendettas. They simply needed him to break a meddlesome prosecutor. Once that failed, the next strike would be deadlier, more surgical. With a new sense of urgency, Cage decided to go public. If he broadcast these partial leads on Hydra, if he rallied the same protests that had dethroned the Cranes, maybe the unstoppable glare of public opinion could save them from the assassin's bullet. At least that was the hope. Another morning dawned with a press conference outside the federal building, cameras bristling. Cage advanced to the podium, wearing bruises that hadn't fully healed, but standing tall. Next to him, Travis skimmed notes, and behind them, Iris Blanchard's camera crew readied for a live stream. Tension rippled among the assembled crowd, activists, bystanders, and a handful of city officials. Cage shared the details about Operation Nightfall, the suspicious shell accounts, the possibility that Crane answered to a higher network. "We can't pat ourselves on the back over one man's arrest if a deeper web remains," he declared. Initial shock spurred applause, but soon a wave of doubt crashed in. A council member snapped at Cage. "Have proof, or is this paranoia?" Others muttered that he was chasing ghosts. Cage's phone rang mid-event, a withheld number. He let it ring. Tremors of fear tingled in his spine, suspecting it was the same voice, urging him to shut up or else. In the swirl of questions, Cage insisted, "We must investigate, not bury our heads. Birmingham deserves to know." The tension flared. Could he unify a city that only just overcame the Crane nightmare? After the conference, the city's reactions splintered. Some lauded his bravery, praising him as a watchdog prosecutor. Others, including the mayor, expressed frustration. "We have enough division. Don't spark new riots." By evening, social media blazed with or finish, the fight versus stop, the chaos. At the safe house, Trey asked, "Dad, do we even have real leads?" Cage's chest twisted. "We have pieces, enough to suspect a puppet master." But he also had a fresh letter in his mailbox, an untraceable threat scrawled in red ink. "This city wants peace, not your mania. Quit or bury your family." That night, Cage advanced deeper into the labyrinth. He and Zara Reyes scoured internal data, rummaging for a hidden hand in DOJ files. They found coded references to hush payments that mirrored Alfred Crane's pattern, but extended beyond Alabama's borders. Meanwhile, Travis uncovered a clandestine foundation that funded certain politicians with known extremist ties. A partial email chain suggested infiltration in multiple states. The puzzle reeked of a broad, methodical push to maintain brutal policing as a tool for profit. Yet everything was circumstantial, enough for suspicion, insufficient for indictments. Dread pressed down on them, memories of bombs, guns, nooses, the warnings that Crane was just a pawn. This Hydra-like entity could strike with lethal precision if cornered. Indeed, signs of infiltration surfaced among Cage's own staff. A sympathetic clerk confided that someone in the building was leaking his every move, anticipating him. Weariness etched lines around Cage's eyes. Trey's flinches at sudden sounds pained him more than any bullet. Rena, staunch as ever, refused to budge, but her worried glances grew frequent. Morning arrived with swirling rumors. A suspicious van parked by the safe house all night, its occupant unseen. The USPS flagged a mysterious package for Cage. The ID was bogus. The police insisted they'd investigate, but from Cage's vantage, it seemed the city was just waiting for him to drop this new crusade. He felt torn. He'd once championed that system. Now, it told him to hush. Even the activists demanded a break, tired of endless battles. The easy route beckoned: retract, keep Trey safe, let the Hydra remain rumor. Yet Cage recalled the scorched cabin, Trey's muffled screams, the pungent odor of burned plastic from Crane's bomb. He'd come too far to feign ignorance. Evil thrived on silence. So, he set a final plan. I'll gather everything, Mila Wynn's data, the hush money logs, the Crane expansions, and release them online to as many people as possible. If Hydra had an Achilles heel, it was unstoppable public exposure. The question, could he do it before Hydra's next bullet found him? Amid lingering cigarette smoke from unmarked cars outside, Cage typed a final message to Iris. The code-laced documents attached, finger trembling over send. Once clicked, there was no undoing. He eyed Trey in the next room. His son's future demanded the truth, no matter the cost. With a steeled breath, KJ pressed send, unsure whether it lit a beacon of hope or a neon target on his back. Iris's expose on the alleged Operation Nightfall erupted across digital platforms within 24 hours. She summarized the swirl of shell companies, coded references, and hush money from the suspicious foundation, shining a glaring light on the possibility that Crane's hateful spree was orchestrated from higher ranks. The city reeled. Memes, hashtags, TikTok testimonies. Everyone dissected Iris's revelations. Some championed Kage's bravery. Others fumed about a hoax, stoked by fear that such deep corruption could exist at all. The next morning, Kage discovered the safe house alarm disabled, front lock suspiciously half-picked. No immediate danger materialized, but the message was crystal clear. Hydra, or whomever it was, wanted him to know they could get in. With unwavering calm, he called Zara Reyes, who rushed in with a special FBI protective detail. She conceded, "We can't confirm Hydra is real, but these spooks operate at a high level, and your article forced them into damage control." A swirl of events followed. Some city leaders demanded an official statewide inquest. Others slammed KG for inciting paranoia, claiming the Crane fiasco was done. As protests heated up again, extremist groups marched in the street, confusing the message. Meanwhile, Rena jammed furniture against windows, unwilling to let them face another midnight assault. Trey remained stoic in the corner, headphones on, bracing for more chaos. Cage recognized the signs of a city fracturing under revelations too big to process calmly. Then a puzzling turn. Hints from a senator in a neighboring state indicated that Black Hydra was rumored even there, rumored to funnel funds for militarized policing under the banner of patriotism. Cage's phone beeped with an encrypted link from an untraceable domain. Video footage of a masked figure detailing Hydra's infiltration across multiple states, naming certain federal prosecutors on their watch list, including Cage. The voice ended with a grim statement. Anyone who threatens the profit structure becomes a casualty. Cage found himself balancing the possibility of forging alliances with bolder federal officials who believed him versus the risk of infiltration. The FBI might still have Hydra moles, so he turned to a separate route, a multi-state press conference uniting civil rights attorneys from across the region. Travis orchestrated the event, while Zara quietly fed them safe channels. They planned to replicate the approach that had toppled the Cranes, but at a broader scale, forcing leaders to confront the Hydra allegations. The day of the conference arrived, tension overshadowing even the largest anti-Crane rallies. A hush fell as Cage stepped onto a stage flanked by state attorneys, activists, and supportive local politicians who had read the evidence. Cameras rolled, capturing Cage's unwavering stance and the resonating question, is the system compromised by forces bigger than we ever imagined? As he presented redacted screenshots linking suspicious foundation accounts to real estate takeovers, the crowd gasped. This time, the blowback rippled nationwide, making headlines on major networks. But only a few hours later, the safe house perimeter was breached. Shots rang out in a flurry. Men in paramilitary gear attacked, presumably Hydra enforcers. Zara's protective detail fired back. In the swirling firefight, KJ shielded Trey behind a heavy oak desk, heart pounding. Smoke alarms blared. The stench of gunpowder filled the air. Over the cacophony, he realized they might not survive. Adrenaline fueled him, recalling each moment he'd vanquished Crane's brutality. Now that same courage propelled him to guard his son from a new breed of assassins. A sudden hush dropped. Helicopter floodlights cut through the night. Official FBI backup. The paramilitary men scattered, pinned down, then collared one by one. In the aftermath, KJ exhaled in trembling relief. Hydra might remain faceless, but its foot soldiers lay caged. Trey cried quietly, Rena hugging him. Zara nodded gravely at Cage, both acknowledging that, while this battle ended favorably, Hydra's intangible head remained at large. In the weeks that followed, the city clung to hope that Cage's revelations had crippled Hydra's reach. Zara's FBI unit pressed for names, turning some paramilitary suspects. A handful of smaller arrests trickled in, but Hydra's rumored puppet masters remained ghosts. Shell corporations dissolved, digital footprints wiped clean. Meanwhile, the spotlight on Cage grew ever brighter, culminating in a nomination for an unprecedented Civil Defender's Honor from the state's Bar Association. Standing on that auditorium stage, bruises faintly visible, Cagey dedicated the award to every person who refused to bow to intimidation. Applause thundered, flash photography capturing the moment. Yet behind each camera lens lurked caution. Cage's new normal meant armed guards. Online threats soared again, hateful corners calling him a race traitor. A leaked memo alleged some Hydra stooges planned payback, like Crane, but bigger. The swirl of victory and danger weighed heavily on Trey, who once again changed schools, quietly forging new friendships under a different name. Rena approached Cage with a sobering idea: relocate entirely, leave Birmingham. "We can't keep being targets," she said, tears shimmering in her eyes as she gazed at Trey. Cage wrestled with the choice. Part of him demanded to stay and fight. Another part saw the toll on Trey's well-being, his restless nights, his trembling whenever a car slowed by their curb. Then a final blow. Unknown hackers plastered Cage's personal data online, including family medical records, addresses, even Rena's license plate. The threat was explicit. "We can reach you anywhere." That same afternoon, while reading an old law text in his battered living room, KJ caught a local news flash about a mysterious entity purchasing large land parcels across the city's outskirts. Signs that Hydra, or something akin, was regrouping. It felt like a Hydra-headed monster indeed. Sever one head, two more emerged. Sighing, he reached for his phone and called Zara. She admitted her task force was exhausted. "We keep chopping off tentacles. There's no single boss we can corner." Reflecting on months of war, Crane's savage vendetta, Alfred's political sabotage, the near-fatal bomb, Hydra's infiltration, KG concluded that finishing this fight might demand a longer, deeper approach than direct confrontation. He'd hammered at the city's darkest corners. Perhaps stepping away from the front lines temporarily could preserve what remained of his family's fragile peace. In that final quiet conversation with Travis, Cage spelled out his plan: gather Trey and Rena, quietly slip out of state, keep investigating from a vantage where Hydra's fangs were less likely to strike. On their last night in the safe house, KJ prepared dusty boxes of files. Trey frowned, packing his gaming console in a beat-up suitcase, while Rena taped up a box of photo albums. Everything felt too sudden, too incomplete. The city's progress was real. Some corrupt cops fired, fresh reforms introduced, Crane and Alfred behind bars. Yet Hydra's existence loomed like a poisonous cloud. Cage looked at Trey, still healing but braver than ever. "We've done our part," he murmured. "For now, the fight can't cost your childhood." Trey nodded slowly. Dawn arrived with a subtle hush. Agents escorted them to a black SUV, loaded with Rena's shotgun, Cage's battered suits, Trey's textbooks. A swirl of uneasy finality washed over them. The engine purred, pulling away from the curb. Cage watched the receding silhouette of the city that had shaped him. Perhaps in the future, he'd return to confront the hidden powers behind Crane's cruelty. Perhaps Zara or Iris would unearth conclusive proof of Hydra's leadership. For now, Kage accepted the unspoken truth. Some monsters remain out of reach until the time is right. An hour into the drive, Kage's phone chimed, a message from an unknown number. "You've taken your illusions with you. Hydra never sleeps." A chill traced his spine. He flicked the phone off. For Trey's sake, for Rena's sake, he had to continue living. He had stared down bombs and bullets, racist cops and cunning senators. If Hydra was truly bigger, so be it. He'd adapt, gather strength from the family he cherished, and strike again when ready. The final image lingered as they merged onto the highway. A battered father and child forging ahead, hearts steeled by justice. The horizon stretched open, uncertain, but offering a chance at fleeting tranquility. And, one day, the final chapter in a war that might only just have begun.